All right, so now at the John David Ebert School for the Study of Culture, Cosmology, and the Arts, we are moving into the study of postmodern philosophy, beginning with Baudrillard. So this is our first of the French theoreticians that we'll be looking at. We will look at Derrida and Foucault. We'll have to loop back over Heidegger, but we'll get there. So Baudrillard, I think he's one of my favorites of all, maybe my absolute favorite of that whole group. Maybe he's neck and neck with Deleuze. I would put it that way. Now here's his Wikipedia page. He was born in July 27th, 1929 in Reims, France, and died at the age of 77 in 2007. And his most famous book was written in 1981, Simulacra and Simulation, and it's in that book, and we'll read that book next week. And it's in that book that he elaborates the concept of hyperreality. So we'll need to think about what hyperreality means. And let's scroll down here to, he wrote quite a few books. He was had a very productive career. His PhD thesis was published in 1968, The System of Objects. And then he was very much interested in Marxism for a while. I haven't read any of his early books. The only one, I start with Simulacra and Simulation, and then I've read just about everything after that. And he gets better and better as he goes. The guy is just absolutely amazing. So we're going to read a number of these books in class. Telemorphosis was put out in 2011 by Univocal, a publisher out in Minnesota, that I proofread the text for that. It was translated by Drew Burke, but I proofread it. So, okay, now let's think about, so we're going to read America this week. We're going to talk about this book in class, which is an absolute gem. So the concept of hyperreality, then, it's not that difficult to grasp. People act like it's difficult to understand. And what does he mean? It has all this nuance. Hyperreal means that we prefer the simulation and that the real has disappeared into the simulation. So it's actually, the real no longer exists. And it's not real unless it's simulated, especially in America. Maybe not so much in Europe, but especially this applies in America. It's the simulation that counts. And not only has the real disappeared into the simulation, just think of a screen, cinema, photography, so forth, but we prefer it. It's not real unless it's simulated. Like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, like the lecturer Rick Roderick gives an excellent example. If we saw a real T-Rex, it would be a disappointment to us by comparison with Spielberg's T-Rex, because we prefer the hyperreality. The hyperreal thing is more real than real. We prefer porn. Real sex is a disappointment. Real sex, you expect all these things to happen that may not necessarily take place. But you've always got the simulation. You can always bring up the porn and you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, wherever you want, because that's reality. So reality is the screen. And I think the third book we're going to read in the class is called Screened Out. The screen has become reality for us now. And this has gotten more and more true with the arrival of the internet, which came along very late in Baudrillard's career, and it's just gotten more and more true. But I believe that we're living in a different epoch now. We're in hypermodernity. It includes hyperreality as a subset. It's part of modernity. There are three different transformations of modernity: modernity, postmodernity, and this book is about postmodern America and hypermodernity. So we'll discuss all three of those in class and so forth. Okay, so this book is fabulous. So he has been to America many times. I think he first came over in 1970. So this isn't like he wrote this and America was like a shock to him. He knew what he was going to encounter. But this book has so many good lines in it. Just great line after great line. And I'll read a few of these here, just so we get a sense of what this is like. When he's talking about New York. And he says, more sirens here day and night. The cars are faster, the advertisements more aggressive. This is wall-to-wall prostitution and total electric light too. And the game, all games, gets more intense. It's always like this when you're getting near the center of the world. But the people smile Actually, they smile more and more, though never to other people, always to themselves. You have to wait. When you're reading a sentence in Baudrillard, you got to wait for the other shoe to drop, because it's going to, inevitably. City of pharaohs, all obelisks and needles. I think it's interesting that he starts out, before he gets to New York, the book opens in the American Southwest with the chapter called Vanishing Point, and it opens in San Antonio and Salt Lake City, Monument Valley, Grand Canyon, and so forth. And it ends with the American Southwest. The last chapter features a photograph of the Arizona desert, and I know that's the Arizona desert because I grew up there. I know it's populated with saguaro cacti, part of the Sonoran Desert. And so it's bookended by the American Southwest, and he's really fascinated by the American Southwest, and he's fascinated by its expansiveness. He goes on in this book about the absolute horizontality of America, especially the Southwest, where you can stand and look around you in a 360-degree circle, and you can see the vanishing point everywhere you look. It's not obscured. In a place like New York, it's the opposite. It's all verticality. As he says, obelisks. A city of pharaohs. It's all verticality, but the further west you go, the less there is a pseudomorphic influence that is coming from European civilization. We become more and more ourselves, I believe, as Americans, the further west you go. All the way to California, San Francisco, Seattle. These are unique places. They have a unique worldview. They are very cosmopolitan. These aren't rubes here. Where this is a sophisticated place. He says we have no identity, but we do have an identity. And that identity is building something new, namely a utopia, just as he says in this book, that we behave as if, he says, Europe has never been a continent. You can see that by its skies. As soon as you set foot in America, you feel the presence of an entire continent. Space there is the very form of thought. And then he's talking about... he says, eco-architecture, eco-society, this is the gentle hell of the Roman Empire in its decline. Nailed it. And we will see that even more so in Francis Ford Coppola's upcoming film, Megalopolis. Probably Coppola has read Oswald Spengler, because we fit the role that Spengler assigns to the equivalent of a Roman Empire. Let's see, he says, some more good ones in here. And this book is probably his easiest book to read. That's why we're starting with it. And then we're going to go back to Simulacra and Simulation. This book was published in 1986, and that was published in 1981. But I don't want to put people off with the difficulty levels of Simulacra and Simulation, because it is his most difficult book. This is probably his easiest, and it's the best introduction to his personality, his very unique, wry, ironic, sardonic way of looking out on the world. The guy is an absolute gem. And he says here, America is neither dream nor reality. It is a hyper-reality. It is a hyper-reality because it is a utopia which has behaved from the very beginning as though it were already achieved. This is as though the moment we get off the boats, this is the new world. And that means new world, brand new world. But really, New England isn't. As it says, as that phrase, New England. New York. They're still stuck on the East Coast with copying European culture forms. It takes them a while to shed that pseudomorphosis, and they have to migrate west until they start coming up with new ways of living and being. And the American Earth symbol is the horizon. It is horizontality, the endless horizon. In that respect, it's very similar to the Russian Earth symbol, which Spengler says is also the endless horizon, because in both cases, we have gigantic countries that just go on and on and on. We've got the Grand Canyon and Niagara Falls and just all this immensity, all this space. It's an epic continent. Everything here testifies to death having found its ideal home. I like that. And then he's at a bar in Santa Barbara, and he loves Santa Barbara. Now, Baudrillard loves America. When Derrida came here, I didn't get the impression that he was all that much impressed with it. Derrida was kind of a very typical, snooty, cliched Frenchman looking down on Americans with disdain. Baudrillard doesn't do that. He loves the place. And so he's at a bar, seedy bar in Santa Barbara. The billiard players' red braces Foucault, Sartre, and Orson Welles are all standing together at the counter, talking to each other. Strangely convincing. Strikingly like the originals. There's that other shoe that drops with him in every sentence. And this wonderful thing about Americans smiling. He says, whether I'm right in all this or not, they certainly do smile at you here, though neither from courtesy nor from an effort to charm. This smile signifies only the need to smile. It is a bit like the Cheshire Cat's grin. It continues to float on faces long after all emotion has disappeared. It is indeed the smile the dead man will wear in his funeral home. Americans may have no identity, but they do have wonderful teeth. One great line after the next in this book. It's just so hysterically funny. And he's making fun of joggers. Remember those? What happened to joggers? We grew up with them in the 80s, jogging around with their Walkman headphones on. He says, you stop a horse that is bolting. You do not stop a jogger who is jogging. Foaming at the mouth, his mind riveted on the inner countdown to the moment when he will achieve a higher plane of consciousness. He is not to be stopped. If you stopped him to ask the time, he would bite your head off. He doesn't have a bit between his teeth, though he may perhaps be carrying dumbbells or even weights in his belt. Where are the days when girls used to wear bracelets on their ankles? What the 3rd century stylite sought in self-privation and proud stillness, he is seeking through the muscular exhaustion of his body. He is the brother in mortification of those who conscientiously exhaust themselves in the bodybuilding studios on complicated machines with chrome pulleys and on terrifying medical contraptions. There is a direct line that runs from the medieval instruments of torture via the industrial movements of production line work to the techniques of schooling the body by using mechanical apparatuses. Like dieting, bodybuilding, and so many other things, jogging is a new form of voluntary servitude. It is also a new form of adultery. Sometimes he says things that are puzzling. What does that mean? How is jogging like equivalent to a form of adultery? I don't know, but it sounds fascinating. This entire society, including its active, productive part, everyone, is running straight ahead because they have lost the formula for stopping. We just keep going in America because we've forgotten how to stop. Everything is jogging over here. Now this paragraph, I have to read this because this is just genius. It's just brilliant. The way he characterizes us as being, there are two things that we are terrified of over here in America. One is silence. We don't like silence. The other thing is that we can't have darkness. The lights are left on. We have to leave them on. It's as though we have to reassure ourselves that we exist. And he says, the obsessive fear of the Americans is that the lights might go out. Lights are left on all night in the houses. In the tower blocks, the empty offices remain lit. On the freeways, in broad daylight, the cars keep all their headlights on. In Palms Avenue, Venice, California, a little grocery store that sells beer in a part of town where no one is on the streets after 7 p.m. leaves its orange and green neon sign flashing all night into the void. And this is not to mention the television with its 24-hour schedules, often to be seen functioning like an hallucination in the empty rooms of houses or vacant hotel rooms, as in the Porterville Hotel, where the curtains were torn, the water cut off, and the doors swinging in the wind, but on the fluorescent screen in each of the rooms, a TV commentator was describing the takeoff of the space shuttle. There is nothing more mysterious than a TV set left on in an empty room. It is even stranger than a man talking to himself, or a woman standing dreaming at her stove. It is as if another planet is communicating with you. Suddenly the TV reveals itself for what it really is, a video of another world, ultimately addressed to no one at all, delivering its images indifferent to its own messages. You can easily imagine it still functioning after humanity has disappeared. In short, in America, the arrival of nighttime or periods of rest cannot be accepted. Nor can the Americans bear to see the technological process halted. Everything has to be working all the time. There has to be no let-up in man's artificial power. And the intermittent character of natural cycles, the seasons, day and night, heat and cold, has to be replaced by a functional continuum that is sometimes absurd. Deep down, there is the same refusal of the intermittent nature of true and false. Everything is true, and of good and evil. Everything is good. You may seek to explain this in terms of fear, perhaps obsessional fear, or say that this unproductive expenditure is an act of mourning, but what is absurd is also admirable. The skylines lit up at dead of night. Now, what's interesting, if you're an American, that would never occur to us because we're the fish embedded in the water. and the fish doesn't know the water until it comes out of the water, and it's in a different environment, and now it's going to suffocate. So you get an outsider's point of view, and they notice things that we don't. I remember Carl Jung coming to America and noticing things like, he says that every American walks like blacks do. That we've somehow absorbed the very loose body language of the blacks and the way they walk with a kind of bouncy stride. It would take an outsider to notice things like that. And he says, Jung also says that our skylines resemble pueblos. And it's as though we have, with their rectangularity. So it takes an outsider to come into an environment and notice what's odd about it that never occurs to any of us to even bother noticing. And so with this, and I paired this book with William Irwin Thompson's book, The American Replacement of Nature, for those of you who have a little extra reading time and you want. Thompson's point of view is very, very vicious. This is a book motivated by love. The American Replacement of Nature, which is one of Thompson's best books, is motivated by hatred, but it's really, really funny. We Americans, we do prefer the fake thing. We prefer, he says, we prefer Cool Whip to real whipped cream, even though any farmer with a dumb cow can make cream, but we prefer the technological process. And it doesn't even taste that great, but the whole point of it is the process, the technology behind it, an entire factory. So Thompson has an interesting take too. Okay, let's see if there's any other quotes in here. We'll discuss some of these others in class tomorrow. With the arrival of pioneer civilization, an extremely slow process gave way to a much quicker one. But this process itself was overtaken 50 years later by the tracking shots of the cinema, which speeded up the process even more, and in a sense put an end to the disappearance of the Indians by reviving them as extras. We exterminate the Native Americans, but those of them that are left, we put them in our movies. They get to play extras in the background. He says, long before I left, I could not get Santa Barbara out of my mind. Santa Barbara is simply a dream, and it has in it all the processes of dreams. The wearisome fulfillment of all desires, condensation, displacement, facility of action, all this very quickly becomes unreal. Happy days. This morning a bird came to my balcony to die. I photographed it, but no one is indifferent to his own life, and the least event still has something moving about it. I was here in my imagination long before I actually came here. Suddenly this stay has become a sojourn in a previous existence. In the last weeks, time seemed multiplied by a feeling of no longer being there, and of living Santa Barbara each day with its fatal charm and its blandness as the predestined site of an eternal return. Just an interesting paragraph there. And then I'll conclude then with this, and we'll discuss, that's about half of the book, we'll discuss the second half in class. The confrontation between America and Europe reveals not so much a rapprochement as a distortion, an unbridgeable rift. There isn't just a gap between us, but a whole chasm of modernity. You are born modern, you do not become so, and we have never become so. What strikes you immediately in Paris is that you are in the 19th century. Coming from Los Angeles, you land back in the 1800s. I think he must have meant 18th century there. Every country bears a sort of historical predestination which almost definitively determines its characteristics. For us, it is the bourgeois model of 1789. And the interminable decadence of that model that shapes our landscape, there's nothing we can do about it. Everything here revolves around the 19th century bourgeois dream. So he has this idea that America invented modernity. But you have to be careful with that, because the odd thing is that's not true. Modernity was invented in France, in Paris, as he very well knows. You get the arcades that Walter Benjamin talks about in his wonderful Arcades project. Those come into being as the very early forerunner of the shopping mall in the 1830s. And then we get the Haussmannization of Paris along with Napoleon III, where the city becomes, it's totally redone. And then we get the first two true modern artists, which is to say in poetry, we get Baudrillard, and in painting we get Manet. And they were good friends. And for Manet, the city is all that there is. The city, the real disappears for him into the city. He has only like one or two paintings of Christ, let's say, but nothing else. All the old iconotypes, the crucifixion, whether they're classical iconotypes or Christian iconotypes, are eschewed by Manet. And so modernism, phase one, begins in Paris. That's an absolute fact. What he's really talking about is America invented postmodernity over here. After the war, postmodernity is an American invention where the real disappears completely. The old idea of the self as a transcendental subject that is argued about all through European philosophy from Descartes all the way down through Kant and down to Heidegger, though Heidegger starts to get rid of that and embeds the subject into a world because Dasein for Heidegger means self plus world. So the self begins to disappear and the real along with it begins to disappear. Now notice that because that's what depth perspective in painting is. You have an absolute subject beholding an absolute object, one slice of space-time, one single slice from one single point of view. They presuppose each other. And so when with the arrival of modernist art, depth perspective in painting is annihilated, and we get the hyperdimensional object, then the subject disappears too. So the subject disappears and the object disappears. The vanishing point disappears. We have a perspectivity, as Jean Gebser talks about in his Ever-Present Origin. That book is a masterpiece. If you haven't read it, you need to. And then so it's really an invention of postmodernity. So what he loves about America is it's not its insipid museums or its boring California wines. Anything that America does to try and copy European culture and sophistication is a failure. Might as well not even try to compete there. What we do well is hyperreality, theme parks, Las Vegas, Venice Beach, California, all of these places that are simulations of real environments, Disneyland. That's what we do best. Roller coasters, entertainment, movies, and he loves it. We've got pop culture over here. We don't have the kind of sophistication that Europe does, but then Europe doesn't really understand technology that well or pop culture that well. The best movies in the world are made by Americans, and the entire planet knows that. We know how to do pop culture better than anybody. And even cultures who hate us, like philosopher, take my conversation with Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, I was completely taken by surprise. He's constantly got negative things to say about America with its arrogant insistence on unipolarity and that everyone must behave just like America, have the same democratic values, the same this, the same, everybody has to be the same, all on the same page. Totally dead, flat, motherfucking wrong. That is total arrogance. Other people have other ways of life that need to be respected, and so diversity should mean not unipolarity, but multipolarity. Russia has a point of view too. It's totally different. Just because we disagree with the Russian point of view does not give us the right to try and stamp it out. So that's a mistake. So when I'm talking to Dugin, I expect a lot of negative comments about America, but when we start talking about American popular culture, that's a whole different matter. He's like, oh, and then he confesses his guilty pleasures for trashy American drive-in cinema, really bad movies like Toxic Avenger and stuff like that. So I actually made him laugh. I've never seen Dugin laugh ever in any public appearance whatsoever. But I told my friend, I have a friend that I told before I was going to interview him, I said, I'm going to make him laugh. You watch. I will make him crack a smile. I guarantee it. Because I'm an American. I'm part of the pop culture of America. We love laughter. We love to laugh. And so it's great. It's an excellent book. Okay, we'll talk about the rest of it in class. Now, if you just want a subscription, to enroll in the course is $250. But that's to attend the classes, which are every Saturday at 2 p.m. But if you just want a subscription, that's $150. And what that entails is that I will email you every Sunday the class that we record on Saturday. So you can do it that way as well. All right, we'll stop there. And keep in mind that I do have a Patreon account, as well as the school and a Substack. So there's plenty of content. All right, see you in class.